Hey, Intellectuals, welcome back to Tanstwocents Quick Wisdoms with Tan, where we call things like they are, with a little bit of humor and a lot of experience and zero fluff. Today's conversation is about the myths of readiness. And in our first segment, I want to talk about good habits, which really don't always equate to guarantees. So, in today's episode, it's about readiness, or more specifically, what do we think readiness will get us? Now, let's be clear. I'm not knocking on capture or proposal preparedness, researching FPS data, tracking recompetes, showing up to the industry days, or downloading updates, or even looking at trends. All of that. They're smart moves. They're what we call good habits, or dare I say, industry best practices. But here's where it gets a little tricky. Doing those things doesn't guarantee that you'll get the outcomes that you're aiming for. And I've seen teams do everything right, and they still lost. Why? Because someone else made a stronger move at the right time, or the requirements shifted, and all that pre work is now less valuable. On the flip side, I've seen even scrappier teams win without the full capture life cycle, just because they showed up when it mattered and made it easy for the government to say yes. And let's talk about the data for a second. Data is very powerful, but it's also very flexible. Raw data is just numbers and noise. It's not valuable until someone actually interprets, digests it, and it's tied to something tangible. And even then, it depends on who's doing the interpretation. So the funny thing about data, it can be manipulated, cherry picked, or even interpreted however you want. It can show you the picture that you want to see or blind you from the picture that you need to see. So, as Nate Silver once said, the signal is the truth, the noise is what distracts us from the truth. And in GovCon, the risk is thinking your data is always a signal. Sometimes it's just noise dressed up in spreadsheets and PowerPoints. So, let me give you a quick example. I review bid scores all the time. This one client had a beautifully color coded spreadsheet showing all the warm and fuzzy things on its pipeline. It looked like a masterpiece. But when you looked closer at the data and where it came from, it gave you the impression that they were crushing it. But really, the data had been crafted to fit a very specific person's narrative. And no one questioned it because, well, it was a spreadsheet with pretty pivot tables, so it had to be correct, right? So that's the thing. Raw data is what I consider neutral. It just exists. But once we start slicing it, presenting it in a specific way, layering in our assumptions and our biases, it's not raw anymore. It's now kind of fully cooked data. And I'm hoping that it's seasoned properly with a little bit of spice and some reality and not all wishful thinking. So, does preparation equal prediction or is it preparation versus prediction? There's a fine line between being prepared and trying to predict the perfect moment to move. We love to feel like we're being strategic. And I talk about being strategic all the time, where we're mapping timelines, reading tea leaves, analyzing budget forecasts like Wall Street traders. But sometimes that crosses into the magic eight ball where we're trying to predict the next steps and the next move. And that's dangerous. You think you're forecasting, but you're really trying to control something that was never really in your control to begin with. And when it goes sideways, it feels like a betrayal. But the truth is, you are gambling on timing and not executing a plan. I see teams all the time who say, we're going to hold until the next quarter because that's when they'll probably release the RFP. All right. So the next quarter comes and goes, and the government totally ghosts you like a bad date. And now your timeline is totally blown. So now what? Being prepared is about building readiness into your normal cadence, and predicting is about reacting to that scenario that many may or may not happen. One keeps you moving, and the other one keeps you stalled. So in GovCon doesn't always reward the most prepared company. We've seen it. Maybe you've experienced it. It rewards the one that shows up in the right time at the right moment. And sometimes it's more of an art rather than a science. But it's never magic, it's just movement. So here's a real example with real cost implications. I had a client work on a recompete, and their goal was this time to unseat the incumbent, which we do all the time in Intellect. They had strong past performance, they invested early in bid strategy and capture. They even hired multiple consultants like ourselves at Entellect to help kind of shape their bid approach and their bid strategy. We had a draft PWS really early in the capture phase, and we assumed that the final wouldn't be too different. The government is very risk averse, so they will rarely change anything from the draft. My customer had a call plan, they had a capture manager, they engaged with the customer, the program team. We asked all the right questions. What were the hot buttons? What were the current contracting issues with the incumbent? What were their future desires? My client showed up to industry days. We followed up with the agency. We tracked the news, tracked shifts in the administration. So on paper, it looked like a textbook capture. But the end, which is what we couldn't have predicted, was the government moved the goalpost. Midway through capture, the contracting office started exploring and splitting the effort into two contracts. They unbundled the contract. The original set aside strategy looked like it was going to come out full and open. Then they shifted it to small business set aside. And then a few stakeholders retired. They moved on. They got reassigned. The changes just went on and on and on. Now, what happened to all of that pre work? It ended up sitting on a shelf in total limbo. Our timeline got pushed, the scope continued to change, and all that investment, time, money, consultants, writing that was potentially wasted. This sounds probably very familiar to many of you. This is what I mean when I say that readiness is not a guarantee. You can be very proactive and still find yourself reacting. But the key is to stay flexible and just keep moving, not to get paralyzed when the picture shifts, and the picture will continue to shift. So, is resistance disguised as kind of readiness? Let's define resistance. It's not procrastination, it's not laziness. It's that subtle internal force that kind of creeps in right when it's time to decide, when you act, submit, or commit. Author Stephen Pressfield once said it best that resistance will tell you anything to keep you from doing your work. It will seduce you. Resistance is always lying and always full of shit. And in GovCon, it pretends to be logic. It looks like due diligence. It tells you, let's run this by another person, or let's just wait for the final RFP, or worse, just don't rock the boat or change anything. But here's the twist. Sometimes that resistance is rooted in actually something real. Sometimes it's not the fear of being wrong, it's the aching feeling that you might be right, but the answer may be very unpopular. There's a huge pressure on BD and capture staff to always make the right call, to time everything perfectly, to never miss a signal. That's just unrealistic. It's kind of exhausting. And even when everything is aligned, the outcome might still not go your way because people move, politics shift, set aside, and procurement strategies change. And resistance uses all of this ambiguity to convince you to freeze. So here's your reality check. Planning isn't progress if it's not powered by fear. If you're constantly second guessing, pushing decisions, or waiting from someone else to pull the trigger, that's resistance. And in the world of capture and proposal, resistance is that silent killer of momentum. So here's your quick wisdom for today. Stop trying to outsmart timing and start respecting momentum. And let's be clear, momentum doesn't always mean you're pushing forward to a proposal. Sometimes that momentum is in deciding to just walk away. Pulling the trigger might mean killing the pursuit. That's still progress as long as it's intentional. Some obstacles can be overcome with some effort, creativity, innovation, strategy, but others, they're immovable. So, recognizing the difference that separates effective leaders from hopeful ones is constantly throwing resources at an unwinnable opportunity isn't persistence, it's poor judgment. So, if you're taking more of backward steps than forward ones, that's a signal too. So, don't ignore it. And course correcting is just part of readiness, but constantly spinning in reverse, that's also a warning sign. So, is it possible to prepare to win? Absolutely. And in fact, my original tagline at Intellect when I first started my business 20 years ago was plan, prepare, and expect to win. But the reality is, readiness doesn't guarantee victory, it just gives you a fighting chance. So the market won't wait for the perfect moment, and neither will the opportunity. So don't stall, don't guess, and move with intention, even if the move is no. Thanks for joining me today for another Quick Wisdoms with Ton. And remember, you have to think big to win big, be an intellectual. And until next time, keep pushing the boundaries of possibilities.